Help is available now. Speak with someone today by calling or texting the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline at 988.
The following is intended for mature audiences.
You guys blow my mind with your experiences. Just take a listen to the submission that I was sent that was prompted because they listened to an older episode of this podcast. Take a listen. Hi, Ralph Anthony. I've been digging through your episodes very quickly since coming across your podcast, and I'm thoroughly enjoying. Keep up the great work. I was caught off guard when I heard your episode of someone who encountered a deceased person at some train tracks. I have a story of my own I'd like to share, but this was about 20 years ago. I had just gotten off work. I used to work as a front desk clerk for a government office, so I dealt with people all day, which you could imagine became extremely exhausting. So to unwind and relax, I would drive to this rest area on my drive home that had a beautiful view of the mountains. If you couldn't already guess where the story is going, unfortunately, the last time I did this, I remember soaking in the view, clearing my mind, but feeling like I was being watched. I will always remember hearing the aggressive buzzing sound of hungry flies around as well. I followed the sound slowly with my eyes as if my conscience knew what I was about to see, but my movements were slow. And to my right, sitting by the edge of the cliff on the outside of the safety barrier, was someone who looked like they were asleep. I could tell by the color of their skin at this point, and the flies, that they weren't. I remember running to my car to call for 911, and then I start breaking down immediately. The person was a dear friend of mine and my family's. What was bizarre about the situation was I didn't realize it was him until I got to my car. Just to wrap this up so it's not too long for you, the days and weeks that followed were long and emotional. I lost my place of peace, I lost a dear friend, and I almost lost my mind. I have had many conversations with my husband and friends about finding him at that rest stop. I had never told anyone I would go there on my own. Did he want to be found by a loved one? Why did he do what he did to himself? The questions will never really have answers, will they? Anyway, thank you for letting me share. Just to close this out on a positive note, I must share that I did find another place to keep my sanity and clear my head. That one is definitely heavy, and we're going to get into this during the submission segment of the show.
Welcome to a world where darkness and mystery converge. Navigate the depths of horror and true crime and join a society beyond the ordinary, where buzzworthy topics, paranormal tales, and listener-submitted experiences blend into a realm of the unknown. You have crossed into a place where the unusual and the terrifying are just the beginning. My name is Ralph Anthony, and welcome to the Scream Society podcast.
Screamers. Welcome into another edition of the Scream Society podcast, what I love to call a variety show from hell. In the dawn of AI going rogue and hacking into random databases, I truly hope generating yourself as a random horror character has been worth it. I feel like I haven't talked to you guys one-on-one in a while. The last few episodes I've had some great guests on, which if you haven't listened, go back and listen to. Some great guests on those. I don't know, like guest host episodes are always somewhat different in format compared to, my solo episodes, which is why I was hesitant, but the response to those have just been awesome. And I definitely want to do more collaborations, so definitely keep your eyes open for more cool content there. But I also should share some big changes happening around the Scream Society these days. First up, you might notice a slight change in format here because it's been taking me so long to put out episodes because I'm only one guy. Okay, I'm only one guy, but I've decided to focus on sinister subjects and society submissions, formerly known as Ralph vs. the Rot, which keeps the variety aspect, but having to do research on multiple cases an episode has really been taking me so long to get them out to you, and I just want to be quicker about it. And I chose those two segments to focus and expand on because I truly think the submissions and sinister subjects are the strongest aspects of this podcast. So why not? But also because of what else I am going to announce. Now, I've also been thinking and I've been seeing your feedback. I've posted polls, and what is pushing me to pursue this is actually from something that my best friend said a few days ago when I was at her house sitting down and we were talking about content and my little short videos that I post as previews for each episode. And she told me that she prefers to actually watch me. So I've been thinking of putting out full video episodes instead of audio. But this is just all part of my journey to taking more risks and investing more time into this project, as well as give those of you a more detailed look into what I'm actually talking about, as well as my endless head bobbing and body rocking back and forth. I don't know why I do that. It's just like I have to keep moving. You know, like I can't sit still. I'm not entirely sure if episodes with guest hosts will be fully visual just yet. I do hope so, but I would just have to find so much time for those. We'll see. But I just want to evolve, and especially as we move into season 3 of the Scream Society, which is crazy to me because I feel like it hasn't been that long. Now, let's get into this episode's sinister subject. Obviously, it was only a matter of time before I covered this David case, and this case truly is horrific and it's confusing because it felt like every time investigators released another piece of evidence, it somehow got even darker, right? Now, if you don't know or aren't fully caught up to speed about this is the case of 14-year-old Celeste Abigail Rivas Hernandez and the singer David. Now, before we get into everything, because trust me, there's a lot, I do want to say that these are allegations that have been presented by prosecutors and investigators. David has pleaded not guilty, and his criminal case is still making its way through the court system. So for now, I'm going to walk you through what investigators say happened, what evidence has been presented publicly, and what we've learned from the preliminary hearing. And I can assure you that there will be a part 2 to this sometime in the not so distant future. So let's start at the beginning here. Celeste Rivas Hernandez was born on September 7th, 2010. She grew up in Lake Elsinore, California with her family after her parents immigrated from El Salvador. She had 2 older siblings and attended Lakeland Village School. From everything her family has shared, they describe her as this sweet, loving, and someone who was deeply loved by everyone around her. Beginning in early 2024, things became concerning. Her parents reported her missing, not just once, but on 3 separate occasions. The first report was on February 15th, then again on March 19th, and then once more on April 5th. It's not entirely clear, though, exactly when she returned home after each report had been made, but neighbors later said that they did see her back in the neighborhood with her parents later that year. Now, at the time, though, nobody publicly knew why she kept disappearing. Now, David Anthony Berg, who was better known by his stage name David, had become one of the fastest rising young artists in music. He was best known for songs like Romantic Homicide and Here With Me, which dealt with the typical themes heartbreak, relationship, and obsession. His debut album, Withered, was released on April 25th, 2025, and just a few months later, he kicked off this major international tour across North America and Europe. And like mostly every case that I cover on this podcast, from the outside looking in, everything always seems to be going fine and dandy. And in this case, it seemed to be going exactly the way an artist would dream of. His career was exploding. He was opening for SZA and just getting out there in social media. But according to prosecutors, behind the scenes, there was a relationship that had been hidden for years. Investigators say Celeste first met David back in January of 2022 when she was only 11 years old. Over time, they allegedly stayed in contact, and prosecutors say that by November of 2023, when Celeste was 13 and David was 18, that the relationship had become sexual. According to investigators, this wasn't just someone she'd occasionally see. They say she spent significant amounts of time with him. She allegedly stayed weekends at his house during the summer. She traveled with him to Las Vegas, Texas, and even London, where prosecutors say she met members of his family. The relationship also became incredibly serious, at least from Celeste's perspective. Investigators say they had matching tattoos that simply read "shh" on their right index finger. They also each allegedly tattooed the other's first name on their left ring finger. And that's an incredible level of commitment, if you ask me, especially considering we're talking about a child here. Then prosecutors revealed something even more disturbing. According to text messages recovered during the investigation, Celeste allegedly became pregnant and had an abortion in January of 2024. Now, remember those missing person reports I was mentioning earlier? During the first investigation in February of 2024, Riverside County investigators looked through Celeste's phone records and found a number that kept coming up. It belonged to none other than David. Investigators contacted him on February 17th, and he reportedly told detectives that he'd spoken with Celeste a few days earlier, but claimed he didn't know she was a minor and didn't know she had been reported missing. Later that same day, deputies from Los Angeles County went to his home in West Hollywood to perform a welfare check. And during that visit, investigators say David told deputies he had only met Celeste one time in person back in November of 2023. He even showed them a yearbook photo of her on his phone. And just 2 days later, Celeste returned home. Once she returned home, her parents then took away her cell phone, hoping to cut off communication with David. Instead, they say David paid one of Celeste's classmates $1,000 to secretly give her a brand new phone that he had purchased himself, allowing the two of them to continue talking without her parents knowing. Now, if that's true, it definitely shows investigators believed that this wasn't a relationship that simply continued by chance, right? Like, they argue there were active steps taken to keep it a secret, to keep things hidden. Now, according to prosecutors, the relationship officially ended around November of 2024, but ended may not be the right word here. They say the two continued communicating and continued having sex even after the breakup. Then in March of 2025, investigators say Celeste sent David a text that really shows where her head was emotionally. She allegedly wrote, "All we do is have sex and just hang out, man. I want more than that for myself." And to me, that's one of the most saddest parts of this entire case, because regardless of everything else, you can hear someone who believed there was a future there and who wanted more than whatever this relationship had become. But things would only continue to unravel here. On April 22nd of 2025, the day before she disappeared, prosecutors say the two got into a lengthy argument over text messages. According to investigators, Celeste confronted him about other women. She allegedly believed they had a future together, while also realizing he was involved with other people. The conversation became extremely heated, and prosecutors say that she threatened to expose the relationship publicly, believing that doing so would destroy both his image and his career. That alleged threat would eventually become one of the prosecution's biggest arguments for motive, because by this point, David's debut album was literally days away from being released. His career was taking off, and prosecutors argue he had everything to lose. The very next day, April 23rd, 2025, investigators say the final chapter of Celeste's life began. So after that huge argument on April 22nd, everything investigators believe happened next comes from digital evidence, surveillance footage, phone records, and what prosecutors have pieced together over the last year. According to prosecutors, though, on the evening of April 23rd, 2025, David arranged for an Uber to pick up Celeste from her home in Lake Elsinore and drive her all the way to his house in the Hollywood Hills. The ride was ordered around 8:40 that night. And what's really eerie here is that investigators were able to recover the text messages the two exchanged while she was on her way. As she's getting closer, she sends him one last message that says, "Girly pop, I'm almost there. Open your door if you're home." And that's believed to be the final text she ever sent. According to prosecutors, she arrived at his house a little after 10 o'clock that night. Then they say shortly after arriving, she was stabbed multiple times. The investigators allege that no attempt was ever made to save her life, but one detail has always stood out to prosecutors because they believe it shows planning. About 20 minutes after, investigators believe Celeste had already arrived, and after they say she was likely already dead, David allegedly sent her another text asking where she was. Now, obviously here, she was never going to answer. Prosecutors argue that message wasn't genuine. They believed it was sent intentionally to create the appearance that she had never made it to the house. In other words, they say it was part of a cover story. Now, after that, Celeste's phone went completely silent. There were no more texts, no calls, no location updates, nothing. That same night, prosecutors say David left his house and drove towards Santa Barbara County. Phone records and location data allegedly placed him near an isolated area off Highway 154 close to Lake Cachuma at around 11:30 that night. Investigators believe he went there to get rid of evidence connected to the killing. And here's what makes that trip even more suspicious. According to prosecutors, he didn't just go there once. They say he returned to that exact same area 2 more times, once on May 8th and again on May 31st. Months later, in January of 2026, a Caltrans worker cleaning near the highway found something that immediately caught investigators' attention. It was Celeste's U.S. passport card. Finding it there seemed to support prosecutors' belief that evidence connected to the crime had been discarded in that area. Now, here's the part that honestly shocked me. The very next morning, less than 24 hours after prosecutors say Celeste was killed, David went right back to his normal life. He returned home. He attended a radio interview, and then he showed up at a release party celebrating his debut album, Withered. And while friends and fans and people in the music industry were celebrating this huge career milestone, prosecutors say Celeste was already dead. Then investigators noticed something else. Beginning literally that same day, a series of online purchases started arriving at David's house, but they weren't ordered under his own name. No. Instead, prosecutors say they were purchased using aliases, including the names Trayvon Davis and Victoria Mendez. Investigators created a timeline of everything that was ordered, and it's honestly difficult to ignore. First came a shovel from Home Depot. A few days later came chainsaws ordered through Amazon. Then investigators say he ordered a body bag. And I didn't even know that they sold body bags online, which if I didn't know that, I guess I'm naive here. Also included in things that he purchased were heavy-duty laundry bags and a blue inflatable swimming pool. Now, finally, in July, prosecutors say that he ordered what they described as a burn cage. Now, obviously buying these things by themselves isn't illegal, but prosecutors argue that when you line them up alongside everything else in this investigation, it paints a very, different picture, right? According to investigators, they believe Celeste's body was taken into David's garage. They allege the inflatable pool wasn't meant for swimming at all. Instead, prosecutors say it was laid out on the garage floor to contain blood while her body was dismembered. When investigators later searched the property, they found blood inside that garage. DNA testing, according to prosecutors, matched Celeste. Investigators also found tiny blue plastic fragments embedded with her remains that they say matched the inflatable pool. And another heartbreaking detail investigators revealed was that Celeste's left ring finger and pinky finger had both been removed. Prosecutors believe the ring finger may have been specifically targeted because it contained the tattoo of David's name. And despite extensive searches, these fingers have never been recovered. According to investigators, after the dismemberment, her remains were separated into bags. Her head and torso were allegedly placed inside a body bag. Her arms and legs were placed into another garbage bag. Then prosecutors say everything was loaded into the front trunk, or what's commonly called the frunk of David's Tesla Model X. And here's what makes the case so unbelievable. Because investigators say her body stayed there. Yeah, not for a day, not for a week, but for months. According to surveillance footage, prosecutors believe David was the last person seen driving that Tesla before it was eventually abandoned. That was around July 29th, right around the same time he left California to begin this international tour supporting his album Withered. The Tesla was left parked on Bluebird Avenue in the Hollywood Hills, not far from his house. It just sat there. Neighbors eventually became frustrated because it never moved. Parking enforcement marked the tires in late August. When it still hadn't moved several days later, the city issued a citation for violating the 72-hour parking rule, and still, nobody came to claim it. So, on September 5th, the Tesla was impounded and taken to a tow yard in Hollywood. 3 days later, on September 8th, a tow yard employee noticed an overwhelming smell coming from the vehicle. The odor was so strong that the employee called the LAPD. When officers opened the front trunk, they made one of the most horrifying discoveries imaginable because inside were the severely decomposed remains of a young girl. At that point, investigators didn't immediately know exactly who she was, but they could already tell the body had been partially dismembered. News of the discovery spread almost immediately, and while investigators were beginning what would become one of the biggest homicide investigations in Los Angeles in recent years, David was hundreds of miles away. The day after the body was found, he performed a concert in Minneapolis as part of his tour. So now investigators have this body that had been hidden inside the front trunk of a Tesla for months, but they still had to answer the biggest question of all. Who exactly was she? Now, on September 16th of 2025, the Los Angeles County Medical Examiner officially identified the remains as 14-year-old Celeste Rivas Hernandez. That's when everything changed. Almost immediately, her family began speaking publicly. Her mother told TMZ that her daughter had a boyfriend named David, but she had never actually met him. She had no idea just how deep that relationship allegedly went. As soon as Celeste's name became public, people online started digging. Photos began surfacing that appeared to show Celeste and David together. People also found years of interactions between the two on David's public Discord server dating all the way back to 2022. Suddenly, prosecutors weren't just looking at an unidentified victim anymore. They were looking at a timeline stretching back years. Then, only one day after Celeste's identity became public, something happened that fueled even more speculation online. An unreleased David demo leaked onto the internet. The file was reportedly titled Celeste_demo unfin, although many people simply referred to it as Celeste. And the song had apparently been exported back in December of 2023, long before Celeste had disappeared. Now, its lyrics reference a girl named Celeste, mentioned someone having his name tattooed on her chest, talked about smelling her on his clothes like cigarettes, hearing her voice every time he took a breath, calling himself obsessed, and worrying she'd only love him when she was undressed. Now, it's important to say this clearly. Authorities have never independently confirmed that the song was actually about Celeste Rivas Hernandez. Because of that, any connection between the demo and this case remains unverified. But if you think about it, considering everything investigators had already alleged about the relationship, the timing of that leak drew enormous public attention, right? And meanwhile, investigators were trying to learn exactly how Celeste had died. The autopsy was performed just 2 days after her body was discovered, and despite the condition of her remains, the medical examiner was still able to determine that this was a homicide. The official cause of death was listed as multiple penetrating injuries caused by a sharp object. Investigators documented 2 major stab wounds to her torso. One wound entered through her abdomen and pierced her liver. The second entered through her lower chest and was deep enough to damage nearby ribs. Unfortunately, because her body had remained inside that Tesla through months of Southern California heat, decomposition was extremely advanced. So by the time of the examination, she weighed only 71 pounds. The medical examiner even noted that portions of her head had become partially skeletonized. Her left eye was missing, and decomposition had progressed to the point that investigators couldn't even determine what color her eyes had originally been. The report also confirmed that her left ring finger and pinky finger had been removed after death. Now, remember earlier when I mentioned investigators believed the ring finger may have been taken because it had David's name tattooed on it? The autopsy supported the fact that those fingers were missing, and like I said earlier, investigators have never recovered them. Another detail that caught investigators' attention was the discovery of tiny blue plastic fragments embedded in the cut surfaces of her remains. Those fragments would later become important because prosecutors believe they match the blue inflatable pool that had been ordered and delivered to David's house shortly after Celeste disappeared. The toxicology results were complicated. Testing detected a low level of alcohol in liver tissue, but the medical examiner couldn't determine whether that came from alcohol she consumed before death or whether it developed naturally during decomposition. Initial screening also suggested possible benzodiazepines and methamphetamine or MDMA. But after additional testing, investigators were unable to confirm the presence of methamphetamine or MDMA, and none of those findings were considered a cause or contributing factor in her death. The report also documented superficial abrasions on one of her hands. It didn't say whether those injuries were defensive wounds, but they were noted during the examination. Now, here's where the case took an unusual turn. Normally, once an autopsy is completed, those findings eventually become public record, right? Well, that didn't happen here. In November of 2025, the LAPD actually went to court asking a judge to seal the entire medical examiner's report, not just parts of it, the entire thing. The department argued that releasing the autopsy could reveal investigative strategies, identify witnesses or confidential informants, and potentially hurt the investigation. A judge agreed and issued what's known as a security hold. The medical examiner's office publicly pushed back here. Chief Medical Examiner Dr. Ode Ukbo said these kinds of secrecy orders are extremely rare and questioned whether they actually help investigations at all. He even pointed out that an earlier request from the LAPD to keep the report sealed had already been denied because investigators hadn't provided enough justification. Still, once the court approved the order, the medical examiner's office had no choice but to comply. And of course, that secrecy only fueled more speculation online. People were wondering, what exactly were investigators trying so hard to keep hidden? It wasn't until April of 2026 that the report was finally unsealed. After it became public, Dr. Ukpo released a statement saying he was grateful the information could finally be shared, not only with the public, but with Celeste's grieving family. While all of this was happening, detectives were continuing to build their case. Now, on September 17th, just one day after Celeste was officially identified, LAPD investigators executed a search warrant at the Hollywood Hills home where David had been living. They seized computers, phones, and other electronic devices. A private investigator working for the property owner later reported finding what appeared to be the burn cage prosecutors would later mention in court. And not long after the search, David's manager ended the lease on the house and he moved out. Around the same time, he hired one of Hollywood's best-known defense attorneys, Blair Burke, to represent him. And even with all of this, investigators weren't ready to announce a suspect publicly. Now, in early October, LAPD officials actually said they still hadn't officially identified anyone responsible for Celeste's death. At that point, they were being extremely careful here. They acknowledged that a body had been concealed, but publicly they weren't yet ready to say who they believed committed the murder. Investigators also believed more than one person may have helped dispose of evidence, so they continued looking into whether anyone else had played a role. One area detectives kept returning to was Santa Barbara County. Remember those trips near Lake Cachuma? Investigators spent months trying to determine exactly what happened there and what evidence may have been left behind. So, piece by piece, the case against David continues to grow. It just wasn't public yet. So, while all of this was happening behind the scenes, the public really didn't know how close investigators were getting. For months, the LAPD stayed incredibly tight-lipped. Even though David's name had already been connected to the case publicly, detectives weren't rushing to announce him as a suspect. They kept repeating that the investigation was ongoing and that they needed to follow the evidence wherever it led. But behind the scenes, things were definitely moving. So by November of 2025, investigators officially considered David a suspect. Around that same time, Celeste's family was becoming increasingly frustrated. From their perspective, months had gone by with very few public updates. They felt like they weren't getting answers, and they believed there wasn't enough transparency from law enforcement. Their attorney even discussed the possibility of filing a civil lawsuit against the LAPD in an effort to obtain records and evidence related to the investigation. The family's message was pretty clear. They weren't interested in media attention. They just wanted to know what happened to their daughter and wanted someone held accountable. Then, on November 24th, investigators made an announcement that marked a huge turning point in this case. For the very first time, the LAPD publicly described it as an investigation into murder. That may sound like a small wording change, but it actually meant a lot here, because up until then, officials had been extremely careful with their language, avoiding publicly calling it a homicide investigation. Now, they were saying exactly what they believed. Deputy Chief Alan Hamilton told the public that accountability was coming. He also made a statement that really stood out. He said, "No one is off the table, including Burke." At the same time, investigators tried to clear up some of the rumors that had completely taken over social media, as it always does. There were all kinds of claims floating around online that Celeste's body had been frozen before it was discovered, or that she had been decapitated. The LAPD publicly said neither of those rumors were true. They also confirmed something investigators had suspected for months. The Tesla had been sitting on Bluebird Avenue since late July, around the time David left for his tour. That timeline supported prosecutors' theory that Celeste had actually died months before anyone found her. Just a couple of days later, another major development happened. The Los Angeles Times reported that an investigative grand jury had quietly been hearing evidence throughout November. Now, if you've never followed a grand jury before, it's basically a group that hears evidence presented by prosecutors to determine whether criminal charges are appropriate. This wasn't a trial. It was investigators building their case. During those proceedings, people connected to David's career started getting called in. Executives from his record label testified. People connected to his management testified. Investigators were trying to understand not only where David had been, but also whether anyone else had knowledge of what happened or helped afterward. One witness who made headlines was live streamer Neil Langston, who was reportedly a friend of David's. He was actually arrested in January of 2026 after failing to appear before the grand jury when ordered. He eventually appeared and testified the following month. Investigators also subpoenaed David's parents and his brother. They challenged those subpoenas in court, arguing that their rights were being violated, but ultimately the judge allowed the testimony to move forward. By this point, it was obvious this wasn't just a simple homicide investigation anymore. Detectives were looking at every possible angle here. Then everything came to a head in April of 2026. On April 16th, nearly 7 months after Celeste's remains were discovered, LAPD officers arrested David at a home on Marmont Avenue in Los Angeles. 4 days later, prosecutors officially announced the charges. He was charged with first-degree murder, continuous sexual abuse of a child under the age of 14, and unlawful mutilation of human remains. But those weren't the only allegations. Prosecutors also filed what are called special circumstances. One of them alleges that Celeste was killed because she could have become a witness in an investigation into the sexual abuse allegations. Another alleges that the murder was committed after financial gain. According to prosecutors, David's music career was on the verge of exploding, and they believe he killed Celeste to prevent their relationship from becoming public and destroying everything he had worked for. They also included a lying in wait allegation, arguing that Celeste came to his home believing she was simply going to spend time with him. On top of that, prosecutors alleged he personally used a deadly weapon during the killing. Because of those special circumstances, prosecutors announced they would even consider seeking the death penalty. Now, David made his first court appearance after the arrest and pleaded not guilty to every single charge. According to court records, prosecutors listed Celeste's date of death as on or about April 23, 2025, matching the timeline investigators had been building for months. Then prosecutors revealed another disturbing allegation. They told the court investigators had discovered what they described as a significant amount of child sexual abuse material in David's iCloud account. That allegation immediately became one of the most talked about developments in this entire case. Now, while all of this was happening inside the courtroom, outside of it, there was another story unfolding. Celeste's family was finally able to lay her to rest. After her remains were released by the medical examiner's office, the community came together for vigils in Lake Elsinore. People brought flowers, candles, photos, and messages remembering her. She was buried at Queen of Heaven Cemetery following a private funeral attended by family and loved ones. Her family released heartbreaking statements describing Celeste as a beloved daughter, sister, cousin, and friend. They said she deserved so much more than what happened to her. Her brother later shared that, as far as the family knew, she had simply been going to see a movie with David the night she disappeared. They had no idea how extensive the relationship allegedly was. After David's arrest, Celeste's mother stood outside the courthouse and told reporters she wanted justice for her daughter. She said she wouldn't stop until everyone responsible was held accountable. Now, following the arrest, the family also released a statement through their attorney calling it the first step toward justice while arguing prosecutors to pursue the maximum charges possible. Even after all those developments, one question still remained. Did prosecutors actually have enough evidence to convince a judge that this case should go to trial? And that answer would come during the preliminary hearing. And thanks to courtroom observers like Sloan, we learned a lot more about what prosecutors believed happened inside that house. Now, this is where the case really takes another turn, because up until this point, most of what the public knew came from search warrants, police statements, and court filings. But once the preliminary hearing started, prosecutors had to begin laying out their evidence in open court. Witnesses testified under oath, investigators walked through the timeline, and for the first time, we got a much clearer picture of the case they're planning to present to a jury. One of the people I was following throughout the hearing was the YouTuber Sloan, who attended multiple days in person along with other reporters covering the courtroom. He shared details about what prosecutors presented and what the atmosphere inside the courtroom was actually like. And one of the biggest things prosecutors focused on was motive. Their entire theory is that this wasn't a crime committed in the heat of the moment. They believed it was about protecting David's career. It was premeditated. It was planned. Remember, his debut album, Withered, was only days away from being released. He was becoming one of the fastest rising artists in music. He had a major label behind him, and a world tour was about to begin. According to testimony, executives and members of his management team told the court that David had earned somewhere between $10 and $11 million between 2023 and 2025. The court also heard testimony that his record deal was potentially worth as much as $19 million. Prosecutors argue that all of that was on the line. Their theory is that Celeste was threatening to expose their relationship, and if that happened, his career would have collapsed before it even really began. That's why prosecutors are pursuing what's called the special circumstance of murder for financial gain. They're arguing that protecting his career and future earnings became part of the motive. The court also spent a lot of time walking through the digital timeline. Investigators reconstructed nearly everything using text messages, Uber records, phone data, location information, and cloud backups. Jurors weren't there yet, but the judge was shown some of the final conversations between Celeste and David. One message that really stood out came from April 22nd during the argument they had the day before she disappeared. According to testimony, Celeste texted him, "I will end your career and your life." Prosecutors say that message is important because it supports their argument that she was threatening to expose the relationship publicly. Then the court moved into what happened the next day. Investigators testified that David ordered the Uber that brought Celeste from Lake Elsinore to his house in Hollywood, and once again, they highlighted what is believed to be her final message. "Girly pop, I'm almost there. Open your door if you're home." After that, nothing. Her phone never sent another text and never connected again. According to investigators, that was effectively the end of her digital footprint. The court also heard testimony about what investigators recovered from David's phone and his iCloud account. Detectives testified that they found sexually explicit photographs involving Celeste, along with conversations discussing her alleged pregnancy and abortion. Those records, prosecutors argue, further establish the nature and length of the relationship they say had been going on for well over a year. Then prosecutors shifted to the physical evidence, and honestly, this is where the testimony became incredibly difficult for Celeste's family. Investigators walked the court through what was found inside the abandoned Tesla. By the time her remains were discovered in September of 2025, prosecutors say she had been inside that front trunk for roughly 5 months. One detail that hadn't really been emphasized before came from an LAPD criminalist. According to testimony, investigators found 11 different air fresheners stuffed throughout the Tesla. Prosecutors believe they were placed there in this attempt to cover the smell of decomposition. Then the jury, or should I say the judge, heard testimony about the garage. Forensic investigators testified that after pulling up rubber floor mats inside the garage, they discovered bloodstains underneath on the brick flooring. DNA testing was performed, and according to a DNA expert who testified, the profile matched Celeste's DNA with odds that were described in court as being 1 septillion times more likely to belong to her than to someone else. That's an almost unimaginable statistical probability right there. The inflatable pool prosecutors mentioned earlier also came back into the conversation. Remember those tiny blue plastic fragments found with Celeste's remains? Prosecutors believed those fragments came from the inflatable pool that had been delivered to David's home shortly after she disappeared. Their theory is that the pool was spread out inside the garage to contain blood while her body was dismembered. Then detectives walked through the online purchases. According to testimony, investigators traced purchases made immediately after Celeste disappeared, including a shovel, a body bag, an inflatable pool, and multiple chainsaws. The prosecution argued that when you look at the timing of those purchases alongside everything else in the investigation, they weren't random. They believed they were purchased specifically to help conceal the crime. Now, as expected, the defense pushed back hard. Lead attorney Blair Burke challenged nearly every piece of forensic evidence prosecutors presented. One of the biggest points she focused on involved the chainsaws. According to the defense, investigators recovered 2 chainsaws from David's home. Those chainsaws were tested. The defense pointed out that neither one tested positive for blood. From their perspective, that raised questions about the prosecution's theory, but prosecutors responded by saying investigators believed there was actually a 3rd chainsaw involved. According to their evidence, David had ordered a 10-inch Makita chainsaw. Investigators say they never recovered that particular chainsaw, so prosecutors argue the fact that the 2 recovered chainsaws tested negative doesn't eliminate the possibility that another one was used. The defense also challenged the DNA evidence from the garage. They argued that because Celeste had allegedly spent significant time at the house over many months, it's possible her DNA had been transferred there long before her death. In other words, they suggested investigators couldn't automatically conclude that every trace of her DNA came from the night prosecutors say she was killed. They also attempted to portray Celeste as emotionally distressed after the relationship deteriorated, suggesting she had become jealous over other women and raising alternative explanations for some of the evidence. Again, this was a child. Of course, prosecutors strongly disagreed with those arguments and maintained that the totality of the evidence points toward murder. Now, according to Sloan and other reporters sitting inside the courtroom, David himself showed very little emotion throughout the hearing. They described him sitting in an orange Los Angeles County Jail uniform with heavy restraints. Observers said he rarely interacted with his attorneys except occasionally during discussions involving financial testimony. Several people described him as appearing unusually still and emotionally detached. Meanwhile, just a few feet away, Celeste's family had to sit through some of the most painful testimony imaginable. At one point, prosecutors displayed autopsy photographs showing portions of Celeste's dismembered remains. Sloan talked about how heartbreaking it was watching her parents and sister remain in the courtroom while those images were shown. Like, you really can't imagine the strength that must have taken. The pain that must have been felt seeing those images. Now, after hearing weeks of testimony, Judge Charlene Almedo ultimately ruled that prosecutors had presented enough evidence to meet the legal standard of probable cause. That doesn't mean David was found guilty. It simply means the judge believes there's enough evidence here for the case to move forward to a full criminal trial. I mean, duh. Now, following that ruling, David was ordered to remain in custody without bail. His formal arraignment was scheduled for August 31st of 2026. And that's where things stand, at least at the time of this recording. Obviously, this case is far from over. A jury has not weighed the evidence yet. David has pleaded not guilty, and like every criminal defendant, he is presumed innocent unless and until he's proven guilty in court. But if prosecutors ultimately prove what they've alleged, this could become, in my opinion, one of the most shocking and disturbing celebrity criminal cases in recent memory. And all courtroom talk aside, it's always strange to me how we have all of this evidence, weird behaviors, sus purchases, all of this. And there are reports that the judge thinks we have enough to move forward with the case. I get it though. Okay, there's a system in place for a reason. Let's take a break.
From the blood-soaked depths of late-night horror comes a collection so shocking, so scandalous, it'll make your wardrobe scream. Want my face on your chest? Or maybe you just want to rep the cult, the logo, the legend, the Scream Society? Don't just listen to the nightmare, wear it, rep it, live it. Get it now before it gets you. Head to scream-society.printify.me and rep Scream Society merch.
We are back and getting into society submissions, formerly Ralph vs. the Rot, where I react to your stories, experiences, situationships, and answer your questions while doing my best to give you perspective and or a little advice. To submit, simply email screamsocietypodcast@gmail.com. My inbox is always open over on Instagram at Scream Society Podcast, or click the anonymous submissions link in all my bios. Remember, mostly everything remains anonymous. It's a pretty heavy episode if you ask me, because at the start of the episode, I shared a story another listener wrote, and that was really fucking dark. So just to recap here, it was about 20 years ago. They worked a government front desk job, and after long days of dealing with people, they had a routine of stopping at this scenic rest area overlooking some mountains to decompress before heading home, which is valid. So on one evening, while they were sitting there enjoying this view, they started feeling like they were being watched. They also noticed this loud buzzing of flies nearby. As they slowly looked toward the sound, they saw someone sitting on the other side of the safety barrier near the edge of the cliff. And at first, it looked like the person might have been asleep, but the color of their skin and all the flies made them realize something was terribly wrong here. They ran back to their car to call 911, and that's when it hit them. It wasn't just a random stranger. It was actually a close family friend. They said they didn't even recognize him until they got back to the car, almost like their brain hadn't processed what they were seeing. In the weeks afterward, they were devastated, understandably so. They lost a close friend here. They lost a peaceful place where they could escape. And they were left with questions they'll never probably have answers to. They kept wondering if he somehow knew they went there alone, if he wanted someone who cared about him to find him, or if it was just all a heartbreaking coincidence. But thankfully, they ended on a hopeful note here and said that they eventually found another place where they could go to clear their mind. And no matter how much time has passed, I have to say, first and foremost, that I'm so sorry for your loss, and I appreciate you sharing something so personal and so dark. Now, I'm assuming because of how things were worded that this was a self-inflicted death, which again, I can only imagine has just left this hell of unanswered questions for you. But I think in situations like these, it's definitely important to seek community, to find someone to talk to, whether that's professionally or if someone is open to hearing you out. I will say, and let's hope I don't sound like an idiot here, but I hope you know that whether it was you who sent this submission in, or you have dealt with something similar to this, or even lost someone like this, that it's okay to stop searching for answers that don't exist. Like, we can't spend weeks, months, years replaying every detail, trying to make sense of something that may never make sense. Like, the focus should be how to move forward from this. Like, of course, you're allowed to grieve, but focusing on the what ifs and the whys that can't be answered is just such a heavy cross to bear, in my opinion. Now, the sender mentioned they're going through my archive of episodes, and I'm trying to remember which episode they heard that prompted. Oh my God. Okay. Oh, yes. Okay. So I remember, I don't know if it's the same one though. So there was this story I shared where someone heard the dead body by the train track story, and then shared their mom's experience where she had been on a morning walk and came across a deceased person as well. I believe it was an unhoused person, but after that, she stopped going on outdoor walks, and it is just clicking for me. Oh my goodness. Yeah, it's totally clicking for me why you mentioned that you found a new spot to decompress. Like, oh my God, like the connection is so I'm freaking out for nothing maybe, but that's so weird. Fuck, that's a lot. Anyway, thank you for sharing. A big thank you to those who submitted to the podcast. Make sure to get those questions and stories in. Always remember to keep it respectful and honest. Check out the links in bio on the podcast socials and support a homosexual in need by buying some merch. And until next time, I will scare you all on the next episode. I truly hope generating yourself as a random horror character has been worth it.
Thank you for tuning into the Scream Society podcast, hosted, written, produced, and edited by yours truly, Ralph Anthony. Help the society grow by subscribing on your favorite platform and leave a rating and review. I always strive for 5s. Have a horror or paranormal experience? Want me to answer your questions on the show? Submit to beacons.ai/The Scream Society. Connect with the podcast on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at Scream Society Podcast. And until next time, I'll scare you on the next episode.